Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Caregiver Corner this sunny February from where I am at in Los Angeles. And I hope that you're enjoying your February as well. Just a few days after Valentine's Day. I hope you had a good one. We're so excited to once again welcome back Stephanie Harrison, who is a one of our kind of regulars here, who's a kind of our founder of Caregiver Corner.
Mhm.
So we did a really great session for you. Just a reminder, if this is your first time joining us or you're not familiar with Stephanie, Stephanie is an expert in the science of happiness and the creator of the New Happy philosophy. She has a master's degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania, where she was later an instructor and was previously the director of learning at Thrive Global, leading the development of science-based programs that improve well-being. Her company, The New Happy, has revolutionized the way people are understand and pursue happiness. Their artwork, newsletters, videos, podcasts, and resources reach millions of people around the world every month. She is a Harvard Business Review and CNBC contributor with her expertise and has been featured in publications such as Fast Company, Forbes, and Architectural Digest. We're so excited to have Stephanie once again with us here. And if you just if you like what you see, her new book, The New Happy, will be released by Penguin Random House May this year. So, Stephanie, thank you again for joining us. I'll just turn it over to a really fascinating topic today. So, thank you again.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here with all of you, and thank you for taking the time out of your day. I will share my screen now, just for a quick sec. And can you all see the slides? All good on everyone's end? Okay, great. Wonderful. So today we wanted to do something to celebrate National Caregiver Day and to talk about all of the different nuances and experiences that go along with being a caregiver. And one of the suggestions that Amanda gave was that we talk about grief. And grief is a really interesting and, complicated topic. There's a lot that we can cover here. And I think what I want to share, just to start us all off with, is a little bit of an understanding of the idea of grief from the scientific literature. And one of my favorite findings comes from a neuroscientist who studies the brains of people who are grieving. And she has come up with this metaphor, this idea that when we are experiencing grief, part of what's going on is that our brains make a map of the people, the places, the experiences in our lives. And that map helps us to feel safe and connected to them. We know where they're going to be, we know what to expect in our lives. And when something disrupts that map, when a person is no longer there, when a life that you had no longer exists, when an experience is no longer available to you, it's very, very disorienting for your brain. It's very difficult to navigate that complexity. You're left wondering, where have they gone? What is going to happen to me? How can I feel safe again? And the process of grieving is really about learning how to revise the map in your head, to learn to come to terms with the fact of what you have lost and to find a way to move forward. That is a really difficult and really painful process. And I think that if there's one sort of core key takeaway that I hope you can gather from today, it's to be kind to yourself as you're going through any process that's emotionally involved as grief. I'm going to share a number of tools that we can talk about. You can feel free to pop any questions into the chat. I'll also save some time at the end so we can dig into that a little bit later. But given we're a small group, I want love for anyone to speak up or share any perspectives, questions, feelings, any of that stuff. I want to start with talking a little bit about the emotional experience of grief. And there's a really interesting, I would call it a kind of a pop culture meme about grief. I'm sure you have heard of the 5 stages of grief that we are supposed to go through when we're grieving. It starts with denial and ends with acceptance. And the way that we talk about grief is as though it's this linear process of you go from this first stage of denial, you go through anger, sadness, bargaining, and you end at acceptance. But in reality, the woman who identified the 5 stages of grief, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, never ever intended for that to be the case, for us to understand her contribution in that way. What actually happened was that Kubler-Ross was one of the first scientists who actually studied people who were themselves dying of terminal illnesses. She wanted to understand what their emotional experience was like as they were going through this process of facing their own mortality. And she identified that there were these 5 common factors that were involved, these 5 emotional experiences. But they weren't linear. It wasn't like you started at one and you ended. It's much more like the image you see here on the right. You go from one to the other. You experience anger and then sadness and then defeat and then frustration and then maybe even some joy and some other positive emotions and then back again. Our emotional experiences can't be neatly categorized into some sort of process or framework. That's not how it works for us. And the more that we hold ourselves to this idea that we have to process our emotions, our grief, or our feelings in any specific way on any specific timeline, the harder it actually becomes for us to move forward and to be able to sit with those experiences. I know that for so many of us, when we think about grieving, this process also makes us feel like we should be rushing through it, like we have to get to the end more quickly, like we have to continue marching forward in order to get to the point where grief is no longer a problem. And I think that all of us who've been through difficult things can attest to the fact that that's simply not true. Most of us live with grief as a part of our lives. And instead of fighting that or denying it, it's actually a lot more helpful to recognize that truth and then learn how to experience those emotions in a way that makes them manageable and understandable and find meaning moving forward, which is what we're going to talk about. I just think that this myth of these 5 stages really ends up backfiring on all of us. And the more that we can accept that every person's experience of grief is going to be different for every single loss or pain that they've gone through, the more acceptance we'll be able to extend to ourselves and others. When you are experiencing any of those emotions that come with the grief process, the core principle is that the more that you meet them with resistance, with judgment, with anger, with frustration, with a feeling that that's not supposed to be what's happening, the bigger they get, the harder it becomes to manage them. Research has found that there are essentially 2 different systems in our bodies. There's the sympathetic nervous system and then the parasympathetic nervous system. The ways in which we respond to our emotions can either activate one or the other. And the compassionate way that we respond when we meet our emotions with kindness, with tenderness, with acceptance, it's called the tend and befriend mechanism. What that means is that you are allowing yourself to soothe yourself, to meet your emotions with the compassion that you actually really need in that moment. Because for so many of us who have grown up believing or being taught that our emotions are not okay to have, that we should hide them away, we should suppress them, we better make sure that they don't bother anybody else, we're far more likely to lead on the first system where we push them away. And again, all this does is create more stress in our bodies, more pain. Some of you might have heard of the Buddhist concept of the first dart and the second dart. If you haven't, what this means is that there is some pain in our lives that is inevitable, physical pain, emotional pain like grief and loss, but the pain that we add on top of that is something that can be avoided when we beat ourselves up for feeling whatever it is that we're feeling, when we deny those emotions, when we turn them into something like anger. All of that does is create an additional amount of pain, and Buddhists call this the second dart. When you are experiencing any one of those emotions that come along with grief, I would love to invite you to practice simply meeting it with kindness and compassion. If you don't know what that looks like, one of the most helpful ways to identify it is to think about how you would respond to a friend in that moment. How would you sit with them? What words would you say? What would your body language look like? And then how does that actually compare to the ways in which you would respond to yourself in an instinctive way? I remember many times when I was first learning that my immediate emotional reaction was often to beat myself up for my feelings, and how I started being able to witness the fact that as soon as I felt sadness or anger or frustration or any of those other difficult, painful feelings, I would move into beating myself up. What's wrong with you? Why can't you pull it together? You shouldn't be feeling this way. Other people have it so much worse. Any sort of self talk track like that that might sound familiar to all of you. And then I also noticed that the more that I did that, the more my pain grew, the more isolated I felt from others, the more difficult it became to simply navigate through the day and to cope with the things that I needed to do as a caregiver. Instead, meeting it with a little bit of kindness and some acceptance can help it to go in such a different direction and to change the entire trajectory of that moment, which has the power to really shift the rest of your day. I also know that as a caregiver myself, the hardest thing is finding any sort of time to care for your own well-being when you're so concerned about somebody else's well-being. And when people would tell me, "Oh, you need to take better care of yourself," or "You need to do this and that," I would feel enraged thinking, "When do you think that I have the time to do that? When do you think that I can carve out an hour to do something like that for myself?" And what I've learned from digging through the research and applying it for myself is that actually that's not really the most powerful way to take care of yourself. The most powerful way to take care of yourself is to respond in the moment of your emotions with this kindness and compassion. That is actually what will have the biggest effect on your overall health and well being. Yes, it's important to still find ways to take breaks if you can, but if that is not something that's accessible or possible for you, I hope that you can find solace in recognizing that this moment of saying, I'm feeling this way and it's hard and I'm going to be here for myself, that is a moment that can have a huge impact upon your overall health and well being and help to support you to continue doing what you need to do. Relatedly, another piece that comes along with this is the idea that it's bad to feel some of these emotions. When you are caring for somebody, it can be really difficult because so much of the tasks that make up your day can stir up uncomfortable feelings, can stir up sadness and anger and frustration, envy of other people, and of course, the grief of what you might have lost, what you wish that you had, the person who you're caring for, and how they have changed. And all of those feelings that you're experiencing are completely acceptable. There is no such thing as a bad feeling. Your feelings are simply indications about whether or not your needs are being met and what it is that you might need to prioritize in your life. When I started to realize that feelings were a type of data that I could learn from, information that would help me to better be there for myself and other people, suddenly my relationship with them was able to change. It was no longer a signal that there was something wrong with me for feeling that way or that I had to hide them away. It was instead a piece of information that helped me to understand myself. When you're going about your day and you notice that, hey, I'm feeling really angry right now. I wonder what that actually has to teach me. I wonder what need this might be indicating that needs to be fulfilled right now. All of a sudden, that shift can help you to approach it with a greater sense of curiosity rather than the instinctive approach for so many of us, which is to shame ourselves or to believe that there is something wrong with us. Again, this is really hard when we live in a world that doesn't make the space for emotional complexity and that often really struggles to provide support for people who are experiencing the multiplicity of emotions that might come along with a complex experience like grief and the trauma associated with illnesses like these. However, what we can do is we can be there for ourselves. We can meet ourselves with the love that we're looking for, and hopefully, we can surround ourselves with one or two people who also get it. I'm going to talk a little bit about relationships and how that impacts the grieving process in a few slides as well. When you're experiencing these emotions, there's a couple of really helpful, really small practical tips that will help to make a difference. The first one is learning how to label those emotions that you're feeling. Because if you want to discover those unmet needs within you so that you can meet them, it helps to know actually what it is that you're feeling because that will point you in the right direction. If you have ever heard of a tool called a feelings wheel, it's a really helpful tool that you can use. You can just Google it online. There's millions of them on the internet. Essentially, it's a wheel that indicates all of the different feelings and how they all group together. When you label your emotions, what's happening inside of your brain is actually that you're tapping into the wiser, more evolved part of your brain that gives you the space to take a step back from the emotion. I'm sure all of us have had the experience of feeling overwhelmed by our feelings, feeling like they are in control rather than our real selves being in control. So when we are labeling those emotions that we're experiencing, we take that control back. We say, I'm the one who's responsible here. I'm the one who's in charge. And a really easy way to do that, once you've identified the emotion that you're feeling, is to label it out loud. It's almost mind-blowing how simple this is and yet how powerful it is. And multiple MRI studies have actually found that it can have a tremendous impact upon your overall level of your level of anxiety, your level of stress, and well-being. So saying to yourself, I feel sad sounds comically simple, and yet it has such a profound impact. When I'm going about my day, I will constantly talk to myself out loud, labeling the emotions that I'm feeling when things feel really hard. I am angry. I feel this way. I feel that way. Helping to identify not only the feeling that I'm feeling, but that I am the one who's experiencing it and the emotion is not in charge. This simple distance can really go a long way to help you to separate yourself from your feelings. And from that distance, we can learn from them. We can identify what they have to teach us about our needs and what we might need to do moving forward. The last piece I want to talk about here with respect to our emotions is the ways in which we tend to shame ourselves for those difficult feelings. It's so easy and so common to view an emotional experience as this indication that you are unworthy of support, of care, of assistance, of love, of your role as a caregiver, of anything else that might come to mind for you. But the most important thing to remember is that it's just a feeling. It's just an emotion. If it helps, you can think about it as a biological reaction that's occurring within your body, as something that is really outside of your control in many ways. It has nothing to do with your overall worth as a person. It has nothing to say about how successful you are as a caregiver or about the impact that you have upon other people or the ways in which you're showing up. It's simply an inner experience. And again, the more that we can shift to really recognizing that our emotions are our teachers, that they give so much wisdom to us if we can learn how to accept and listen to them, the easier it becomes to embrace the fact that our emotions are going to happen no matter what, and we as ourselves are worthy no matter what we do. I want to pause for a quick moment, see if anyone has any questions, anything that they want to bring up before I move on. I can't see the chat in screen share, so just heads up if you put anything in there, I'll grab it after. Okay, cool. Feel free to jump in at any point. Now moving on to talking about our relationships in grief. I think that this is probably one of the most difficult things for us to reckon with when we're going through this grieving process or navigating a loss of any kind. It's the moment that we need people the most in our lives. And unfortunately, it appears to be incredibly common that it's the moment that people feel the most alone. We need other people in order to not only thrive, it's the number one contributor to our overall well-being is the quality of our relationships, but we also need other people to simply survive, to get through the challenges that are in front of us. Without them, it would be impossible to move forward in any way. And when the people around you don't show up for you in the ways that you hope that they would, or that you expect them, or perhaps the ways that you showed up for them when they needed you, it can lead to so much additional pain. And it feels like such an injustice, doesn't it? Because you're suffering already. You're going through so much and there is all too much to do on your plate. And then you have to deal with this on top of it, the loss of a relationship or of the person that you thought that they were and are having to reckon with the fact that they are not. The more that this happens, the easier it becomes to be isolated, to feel lonely, to feel as though you don't have anyone else around you. And those factors are a huge issue in terms of our overall physical health and well being, as well as our ability to continue showing up for the people in our lives that we care about. The good news, though, is that research has found that you really just need one or two people to be a support system for you. Having those individuals around you actually can act as what's known as a stress buffer. Whenever I hear that phrase, I always think about a protective bubble surrounding you of people who are there to, make sure that nothing hits you when it's flying at you. And that's really what it feels like when you have one or two people in your life who will be there for you to support you. Those individuals might surprise you. A lot of studies have found that when people are grieving, they're surprised to see who shows up and who stays with them in those times. Oftentimes, the people who do show up aren't those who are closest to you. They might not be your immediate family members or your closest friends. Those people might not be able to or have the ability to understand what it is that you're going through. Oftentimes, the people who do show up are those who have also known what it is like to really suffer and to really go through a difficult time. So, there's a couple of different ways that we can identify how to find these people and how to lean on them in our relationships. The first is to be mindful of who is reaching out to you, who is continuing to check in with you. I know that when things were really difficult in my own life and I was so overwhelmed with my duties as a caregiver, I didn't have any sort of capacity or bandwidth to reach out to other people. It was something that felt completely impossible to me. And because of that, a lot of my relationships fell away. That was really painful for me because I expected that people would continue to show up and be there and to support me. And there were a few people, though, who continued to check in, even when I didn't respond, even when I was unable to give back in the ways that I wanted to as a friend or as a family member. So consider in your own life, is there somebody, one or two people, who has been persistent in checking in on you or who continues to remember things that matter to you, who wants you to be okay and is willing to show up for you in that way? Those people can be your support system to lean on. They've indicated that they want to be there for you. One of the hardest things about chronic loneliness, which is a very, very common problem for caregivers, is that when we're lonely, our brains shift into this self protective focus. They stop looking for cues that show that we belong and they start looking for cues that show that we don't belong. Our brains pay attention to all of the ways that other people might be rejecting us or all of the ways in which we are being left out. And unfortunately, our brains are really good at telling stories and focusing on those things, ignoring the ones that indicate that perhaps people do still love and care about us. We have to override that by finding ways to really tap into and notice, where are people trying to connect with me? How are they doing that? And what does that look like? It doesn't have to be big either. The more that you can pay attention to any small outreach that people give you, whether it's an email from a colleague or a phone call from a family member checking in, or someone just being kind to you at the store or on the street. All of those little moments actually add up and can provide that protective stress buffer to help you to stay strong as you're going through these challenges. When you're working with these people, when you're connecting with them, when you find those people who are indicating that they want to be there for you, one of the things that often most gets in the way is this feeling that people have that we have to fix each other. That if they can't solve your problem, then there's nothing that they can do. And that makes people feel really defeated. It makes them want to give up. It makes them feel like they're a failure. And too often that emotional difficulty becomes really overwhelming for them to handle, and they might find themselves retreating. But I think, as all of us can probably attest to, what really matters when you're going through a hard time is just that somebody's there for you, just that you're not alone in facing the problems that you're experiencing. Sometimes we have to train the people in our lives how to do this. And I know that on top of everything else that's on your plate, this feels so frustrating that there's more that you need to do, but it can have a really big impact down the road. So, a phrase that I really like to use that you can try out is, I don't need you to fix me or this situation. I just want you to be there with me. I want you to be there with me in it. It's words like this that give people the permission to simply be with you rather than feeling this pressure that comes from within themselves to make things better. Because in these situations, there isn't usually something that people can do that's tactical or tangible that actually will make the challenges of your life disappear. But they can help to lighten the load by staying with you and helping you to support you as you go through it. By being really clear about what it is that you need from these people, you're much more likely to get it. And again, I just want to reiterate, I know how frustrating it is that when you're going through something so hard that this burden falls upon you. But at the end of the day, my goal is to help you to get your needs met. And this is the fastest way to do that. The similar thing is very true with when you need help with things that are more specific. So, for example, you need meals to be brought into your house and put into your freezer. You need somebody to help drive you to a doctor's appointment. You need some support when you're going on a business trip out of town. Whatever it is that you actually need some tangible physical help with, the best strategy is to be very direct about it, explicitly saying, "This is what I need right now. Can you help me? Can you provide this to me?" If they can't, that's okay. At least you know, and you can move on and you can find somebody else to connect with, somebody else who might be able to support you. But if you don't ask, it's really hard to know whether or not you're going to be able to get it. It's also helpful to really consider who is the best suited to help with different types of tasks. Some people are really good listeners and they're really good at being there for you. Other people, not so much. Other people are really good at instrumental tasks. They're good at picking up prescriptions from the doctor or helping to sort through insurance paperwork. That is a task that you might want to pass on to them. So being mindful of the ways in which people are uniquely equipped to help will again help you to fulfill your needs in the ways that you need it. Again, the key to continuing like on a daily basis as you're navigating both the complexities of being a caregiver and then the emotional experiences of grief is having other people who you can lean on who can support you. There's a really great theory from a researcher in grief which is called ring theory. I think about it a lot, and I think that it offers a really important perspective. Essentially, if you imagine somebody at the center who is the person who is affected by the issue that's going on, so in this case, likely the person that you're caring for. And then in the rings outside of that person, concentric rings coming outward, are all the other people who are affected by that. The closer you are to the center, the more that this event has affected you. So, as a caregiver, you're probably in the second circle, right around the person who is ill. And then there are all the other people around you. The rule is that the person in the center can express any of their emotions outward. They can lean on anyone, they can dump their feelings, they can do whatever it is they need to do. If you are in the next ring outward, you also need to do that. You also need to be able to express your feelings outward to other people. You need your own rings around you at the same time. Often, the difference between feeling like a day is manageable and feeling like a day is going to be something that absolutely depletes you and takes everything away from you is just simply having somebody in your corner who says, "I believe in you. You can do this. You can find a way to move forward." If you don't feel like you have somebody who can do that, it can also really help to surround yourself with external influences that make you feel hopeful or optimistic. So, is there music that helps you to feel alive or connected to yourself? Movies, television shows, any form of media that helps you to really understand yourself or to feel motivated and inspired? Are there specific social media accounts that you can follow, emails that you can read, books that you want to return to, quotes that you can put up, whatever it is that helps you to give you a little bit of inspiration to keep moving forward? You're allowed to lean on other people. And I know it can be really hard to remember that and to keep that in mind, but you have to have your own rings. You have to have people or sources of inspiration and support that help to be your bridge to move from feeling this discouragement to feeling some sense of hope and possibility about the future. One final thing here, just to call out another really helpful tip that I have learned in my own relationships as a caregiver is asking those people in your life to bring up your challenges in a different way. We all probably have a different level of tolerance about, how much do we want to talk about what we're going through and how often do we need to do that? And a lot of times people want to ask, they want to know how you're feeling, but they don't want to bring it up. They don't know how to bring it up. They're not sure whether bringing it up is going to make you feel worse about yourself or worse about your situation. And so they don't end up bringing it up at all. And of course, all that happens then is that you feel lonely and you feel isolated and you don't get the support that you need. it can be, again, really helpful to be explicit with the people in your life about what would be most helpful for you. So, for example, if you tell somebody that you would like them to ask, "How are you really doing?" then you will respond honestly about your emotions in that moment. You can say that if you can set kind of these ground rules about how you want to respond. If you reply back and you say, "I'm fine today," that can be a signal that you don't really want to get into it. You don't really want to talk about it, but at the very least, they've given you the chance to ask about it. I remember so often my family would ask me how I was doing, and I didn't really feel like I wanted to get into it in that moment. I didn't really feel like I had the emotional strength to get into how I was really feeling, and I was worried that they didn't actually want to know either. So, being very clear about the fact that you want them to ask you at specific points in time or in specific ways will give you a chance to open up in a safe and supportive way. And at the same time, you can remind them, I don't want you to fix, I don't want you to try and to change anything. I just want you to be there and listen. Let me share my emotions. Let me express everything that I'm feeling because you are in my ring. You are somebody who I need to lean on to support me as I'm processing all of these complex emotions that I'm feeling. All right, I'll just pause one more time. I think I saw something come up in the chat. I'm just going to quickly jump and see if there's anything. How important is it that the people we have for support are there with us in person as opposed to texting or video calls, etc.? It's such a great question. The difficult thing here is that the we do get a benefit from being in person with others. It helps us to like to reconnect to our own positive qualities. It helps us to stabilize our nervous system. It provides us with a level of support that feels different in our physical bodies. But that's not really accessible to many people. Due to the pandemic, for example, I've been living in isolation for 4 years nearly, and so any sort of in-person support has not really been something that I could lean on. And you might be in a similar position as well, depending on what you're going through and your level of precaution. So I think that what matters most is just that they're there and that they're available. So for me, my support system has been almost exclusively through phone calls and text and through other forms of technology. And while I wish that that was different, that's the situation that I'm in. And I have been able to cultivate really strong and positive relationships with those handful of people who are present and who have been there for me. So whatever form you can take a supportive relationship in, the better it is, really. Any other questions? Thank you. It's such a good question. Okay, I'm gonna go through these a little quickly because I just want to save a few minutes at the end. But one thing that I find really heartening is the research around post-traumatic growth. So I'm sure everyone here has heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a maladaptive response to trauma that can lead to many difficult experiences with your well-being. And what researchers have found is that there's also a different response to trauma, which is called post-traumatic growth. You can use what you have been through to grow, to learn new skills, to be of service to others, to find a greater purpose. And this is something that is within our control. It's something that we can focus on. And really, what the core driver of the shift from any sort of negative reaction to trauma to this more generative approach to trauma comes from the ways in which we choose to respond to it and the power that we have. I think it's really important to honor the fact that we are not we are not separating these two things. So the experience of grief can live alongside of a desire to make meaning, to find ways to grow and to make a difference in the world. It's not an either or thing, it's a both and thing. The experiences of grief that you have are completely normal, they're completely acceptable as they are, as well as any desire that you have to find a way to make meaning from that experience and to use it in some way, whether that's simply accepting it, whether that's learning from it, trying to make a difference through it, whatever feels right for you. the more that we can embrace these two things that seem like opposites, the more in balance we can find ourselves. One key research finding that I have personally found really helpful is from a researcher at the University of Chicago who has discovered that there is a profound activity that you can do to help you to move on from traumatic experiences. And it's basically journaling, but they call it free writing. So basically, the recommendation is that for 4 days in a row, you set aside 15 minutes and you just free write anything that you're feeling. You can focus on any traumatic or difficult experiences that you've had, writing about them just at will without censoring yourself, without judging yourself. No one will ever read this, and you don't have to read it either if you don't want to. But the simple act of spending that hour spread out over 4 days has been found to have a major impact on one's ability to respond to trauma and to move forward in a positive way. And the finding really comes from the fact that what you're doing is allowing yourself to process your emotions, but you're also allowing yourself to become the writer of your own story. At the same time, this process helps you to understand what you've gone through, what you are experiencing, and then decide how you want to make meaning from it. So, if you have been struggling, it's an intervention that I highly recommend. You actually will get just as much benefit just doing it at once, but the more that you can do it, it can really help you to unpack difficult or more prolonged past experiences. So again, you just simply sit down, free write for 15 minutes about any pain that you've experienced in the past or are currently in, and it will help you to be able to move forward. Another key way to think about this is to consider how what you do aligns with your core values in life. So, all of us have certain values that drive us. And when we live in alignment with those values, we experience greater happiness and fulfillment in our lives. One core way to find meaning in these difficult moments and in the grief experience is to consider how are we showing up in alignment with those values that really matters to us. Oftentimes, it's really easy to focus on all of the things we're not doing well, all of the ways in which we are potentially letting the person in our lives down or letting ourselves down or what we've given up and what we've had to say goodbye to. But if we turn our attention to the what we are honoring, the ways in which your commitment to the people in your life, the ways in which your devotion and your dedication manifest on a daily basis, it can become a very powerful way for you to affirm what matters most to you and also see the impact that you have, the ways in which you're able to show up in alignment with your values. That's not something to take lightly. It's a tremendous contributor to your overall well being and something that again provides another stress buffer to help you to navigate the ups and downs of your daily life. If you need some help identifying your core values, I've made a tool that you can use. I'll pop it in the chat after that makes it really simple. Basically, just figuring out the 5 values that matter most to you, and then ask yourself, how am I living up to these, or in what ways might I strive to continue honoring that? Excuse me. As you're thinking about grief, one key element that I think is um, rather particular to the population that Solve serves is that many people who are dealing with this illness have lost a big part of themselves. They might have lost the activities that matter to them. They might have lost core emblems of their identity or ways that they define themselves, and they might be suffering from severe consequences because of that. And it feels like, the person that they are has been ripped away from them. And in that same way, the person that you once were might feel like it was ripped away from you too, with this new role that you're in and all of the things that are now a part of your life. If you are grieving that person that you love or that person who you once were, it can also be really helpful to consider what it looks like to stay connected to that version of yourself. So, for example, if you always loved making art, but now as a caregiver, that's something that you don't have time for, is there any way that you can integrate that love of art into your life in one way or another? Whether it's spending a few minutes looking at a book or bringing out a sketchbook and doing a little drawing every day, whatever is accessible to you, how can you honor that? And then providing that space for yourself, even if it's small, once again fills you with a sense of meaning, a sense of agency, and a sense of purpose, of well being that you can really lean on in the more difficult moments in your day.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your participation, especially folks on this small group. It's been wonderful to have you all in this intimate setting. Stephanie, thank you so much for your time and that walkthrough. As folks know, as a caregiver myself, I always wrestle with that pull that you why not I doing more, that kind and I really feel like that helped me navigate a lot of those feelings. So many thanks all around. Again, thank you for all for coming in, been especially being patient with us with tech issues. And we'll be back in 2 months with our next caregiver corner and topic and date to be announced. So thank you all again. Oh yes, definitely check out the new happy and the values wheel there. What a great tool. And we'll see, and we'll make sure to include that in the video recording chat. And again, thank you all for your time. We'll see you in a few months.
Thank you.